Welcome to another episode of the Apex Perspective podcast. Today I have with me Jonathan Wess, who is an entrepreneur. He's an educator in entrepreneurship and is a COO at Banter. Jonathan, let's get started with your background and how you started to pursue entrepreneurship firstly, and of course, how you got into the academic world.
Yeah, so entrepreneurship was not my first path. Throughout high school and actually throughout my entire life up until that point where I had to kind of choose a career, it was going to be architecture. I had taken 4 years of pre-architecture courses. All of my college credit was in architecture. And then I took an entrepreneurship course because one of my friends wanted to start a business with me. And they're like, if we're going to start a business together, we have to know that we work well together. Let's go into this entrepreneurship course and we'll see if we actually work well together. And I said, great. Let's try it. I said, I'm going to have to use it in architecture either way. So I was going to eventually start, of course, my own architecture firm. So it was a win-win in my eyes. Very fast did I realize in that class in high school that not only is that where my career started, because I started to build connections with some major organizations in Buffalo, like 43 North and Launch New York, all the way back then. But also I got really good to the point where the business that we were running in high school, I actually was leading marketing for it and had the team and was able to work with people. And I was doing really innovative things to the point where the teacher that led the class, one of my favorite mentors, her name's Carol Conchagulian, we call her Conch. She actually brought in a director of an entrepreneurship program in the city, which was for a university called Canisius University. Back then it was Canisius College. And it was one of the only entrepreneurship programs anywhere. It was literally, you had that school and then you had Syracuse University, which I now teach at. And it was just the two of us. So I was showing this director of this entrepreneurship program what I was doing. I was knocking down walls. I was like making sure that it was reformatted right so we could see customers. I was like really playing into it. And by the end of it, she said, we need you on that program. Would you come be part of the program at Canisius University? And
While you were in high school?
While I was in high school. So
Wow.
I then went and I turned my entire path. I literally went into the living room one night and looked at my mother and I said, I think I'm going to go to Canisius. I had already gotten into the University of Buffalo for architecture. And I said, I think I'm going to go to Canisius actually, and went for entrepreneurship and political science. And from there, it just really, my career kind of spouted off. I've eventually got to be vice president of youth entrepreneurship for a club called the Collegiate Entrepreneurs Organization, which then led me to eventually become president of that, which then I grew my network. I was able to become a Western Prosperity Fellow, which got me connected to all the UB connections, which then eventually I got to sit at tables of the people that built the Buffalo startup community, because Buffalo startup community was at that point in time only about 5 years old. So they were all still there. They were all part of it. And I got to be part of things like the beginnings of the 43 North pitch competition. I got to be in the company I started during school. I got to be in the same building as all these people and all these builders, which kind of leads me to, when I was in college, one of the things that we had to do was we had to start a business to graduate. And I started this business called Time Capsule, which was a legacy building business. So we pretty much asked questions to record them in 360 video. So that way later down the road, you could put on a VR headset and have a cup of coffee with someone that's already passed away.
Wow.
And eventually that pivoted many times, and we ended up going all the way to the company just being to record how you're doing over time. And we worked a lot with consultants, a lot with entrepreneurs, eventually pivoting into entrepreneurship centers. And then we were making money, but we weren't making enough to pay me. And during that process of building that company, just so you know, timeline was pretty much after college. I ended up going to work for a startup called Memory Fox, which I loved and loved the founder. That was a whole thing of he needed to restructure due to budgeting. But I still talk to them, still love them. I think they're a great company. And I learned so much. I ran customer success for them for a little while. and then went on to working for myself for a year. And at the end of that year, I said it was time for me to get into a dream job because an offer came up from Syracuse University, which was a school that I wanted to go through for architecture. It was a school that throughout my college experience, we could actually apply for awards with, and we always lost out to them. So and it was, it is a spectacular school for entrepreneurship. So end up getting a job as the program manager for the Blackstone Launchpad. During that time, I decided to give up my company and really give over the process to one of my clients, and was able to kind of move forward that way. During my time at Syracuse University, after giving up my company, I got an offer from a company called Banter, which is a social media app for TV lovers. It's in the App Store, spelled Bantr, if anyone's interested, and already out there. And I've been able to come on as the operations person for them, helping them to manage the team, really getting them going for fundraising, making sure that they're all set to do that way. And during that process too, I was able to take on a position as an educator, and now I'm a professor at the School of Informational Studies as an entrepreneurship professor. So really running people through the process on top of that, which I've been able to, which has opened so many doors for me, because now I talk about things like founder mental health, which has become a really big cause to me. And I've talked about that now on a global stage. I have been able to really teach about public speaking and how does that match with a pitch, and how do you seem like more confident as a professional and as an entrepreneur with that. So, and then on top of that, throughout all of that, and we talked about this, a little bit before the call, but there was so much more that I did. I'm leaving out such big parts.
Right, you are.
Expos with Buffalo Startup Week. I was on the director team at Boot Sector, which is the nonprofit that helps startups for a while, and I've helped a lot of different programs, and just so many things. But that's a very long-winded way of saying about my future. Yeah.
Well, before we get into your time as an educator and of course your perspectives on entrepreneurship, I would like to understand, when any of your parents or potentially family members, are they entrepreneurs, or what compelled you at the high school age to want to even consider starting a company?
I do have entrepreneurship in my blood, but that wasn't the reason why I wanted to go into it. My father had his own company for a little while. His parents had many different companies. His grandmother had a company, like, you know what I mean? It was just, that was part of the blood, which I didn't even find out about until after I had started my business and I started going into things. And I'm like, oh my God, that's what that meant. Which was super cool. As well as my mother had some entrepreneurship endeavors, and my grandfather worked at Bell Labs. So like, he was always innovative and that kind of stuff. But really what started my journey was, it was just, I wanted to start something cool. I always liked the idea of running a business. I always liked the idea of having those skills. So when my friend came to me and she's like, this is something really cool, and do you want to do this with me? And I was like, and she was a really good friend at the time. It was high school. So I'm like, yeah, totally. I'd love to do that with you. It just started my process to go into the entrepreneurship class. And, then I got the offer, and the final decision was me being like, if I went into architecture, it seemed like a pretty set life. Like I kind of knew I would be able to get the internships. I'd be able to do that because I work hard and I know how to get there. But entrepreneurship and political science, I'm like, I always wanted to see if I could run for president. I always wanted to see if I could be a successful entrepreneur. I've always but the only way I could do that is if I tried. And that really launched my career into the entrepreneurship field.
So then later on, with Time Capital specifically, you had pivoted that company into a different direction. And what I'm curious about is, from your experience as an entrepreneur, when is actually the right time to consider a pivot? And is it too quickly sometimes? And sometimes people go too quickly potentially. But I want to hear from your perspective, what is like the right time?
Yeah, to be quite honest, you should fall into the pivot. The reason why I pivoted was because we couldn't get the tech working because it was back in the day where you needed that tech person to figure out what that was like. You didn't have that AI or anything like that like we do now. So I couldn't really get the tech working. And no matter how much I tried to upload things, it just didn't work. So I had a
Okay.
mentor that said, I started the business, legacy business, because I had lost my dad really young and I wanted to know what it was like to learn from him. And I said, there's got to be a way to fix that. So what my mentor said to me was, why are you focused on what you see in front of you when you would rather hear your father say these things to you?
Mm-hmm.
And that led me to my first pivot of taking the product actually out of the market, doing a lot of research on how to interview and how to understand and talk with social workers and novelists and people that created characters for a living and how they created those characters, the other people that lost a parent. And that
Mm-hmm.
started my first pivot into just doing it outside of the VR. And then as I did that, I went to a networking event. One of my friends was speaking as an honored woman at the NABO, the National Association of Women Business Owners. And I went and I met someone who had a consulting firm, and she said, her and I were talking and we were really vibing with how we were talking about entrepreneurship and helping people, and we were talking about her clients. And she suggested saying, look, actually this would be really interesting to try and guide my clients forward. And I said, let's try it. I'm just like, she was willing to pay me, she was willing to try, why not try something? The other thing wasn't working, so why not try it? And that led me to create a whole new not a whole new process, but to a whole new way of marketing it, which actually brought me on 5 entrepreneurs overnight. And it was pretty much, I went to a networking event, I talked about it to entrepreneurs, and 5 of them signed up, plus her, and she brought at least 5 clients. So it was like the pivot just happened automatically. Now I will say that I pivoted too late. And that's why I think the company didn't end up doing as well as I would have liked, because I was so honed in on what to do, on that was the right thing, that I didn't do a lot of research on it, which is why now I preach customer discovery. I preach doing research. It is like to the point where it's really funny because I hated doing customer discovery when I started out. And I'm the person people go to for customer discovery here. So like when I tell people at home that helped me, they're like, oh my God, what? You're doing what? And I'm just like, yeah, like now I know the benefits. I know what has to happen. And to be honest with you, the reason why is because I know what it's like to not have that. So a lot of pivoting happens based on need. I would say that there's no time too soon and there's no time too late to pivot. As long as you're doing it based on what the market is, what the market wants. And if that actually follows with what aligns with your company. Those are the 2 things that matter.
So not only entertain new perspectives, but look for them specifically and take advantage of the opportunities that potentially align with your company. I love that perspective. So then, talking about your time as a professor, helping students go from ideation to actual execution, that's a bit more of a difficult task, I can imagine, because you're talking to individuals who have not been used to potentially executing in the real world yet. So how is that process like, and how do you teach that to a younger individual who hasn't done much execution?
Yeah, and to be honest, the biggest hurdle for me is the fact that entrepreneurship is so different depending on every business that you work with. It's not. I'm coming up on about 500 businesses that I've worked with, and that what I know from it is that every business is, yes, very different, but there's always a starting point that starts relatively the same. So being able to guide them through that, it's a pretty structured thing. You could go do a business model canvas, you could do then you do research, then you do, customer discovery, then you go into actually figuring out what's a customer discovery, what the actual challenges are, and then you go into the product, and then you keep going from there. That's the biggest hurdle, because if I have a consultancy in the class and I have, let's say, a consultancy, I have a photographer, I have a physical product, and then I also have a high growth startup. Once you get past the how to solve the problem, everyone gets a little different. Everything from pricing is different depending on market, to the operations of the company, to what the marketing looks like. But what I realized is that there's tactics for all these that I can teach them and tell them how it relates to all of them. So once you break it down into there's bigger topics that you can check off in that box.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when you go to break it down, that's what the students are hearing from you. So it's
Yeah.
instead of being like, this is going to apply to everything, it's like, yeah, at its core, you're going to need to figure out a price. Okay,
Okay.
now what you're listening for is when I say, if you're a high growth startup, this is what it means for you.
Mm-hmm.
And it really breaks it down to the point by the end of the semester, my class actually has to go from having an idea to actually having sold to someone.
Income. Yeah.
They have to have had some sort of revenue. And I do
That's
accept letter
really amazing.
if they haven't gotten done with their
Yeah.
MVP, but they also have to meet with me to show me the fact that they're working towards
Love
their
it.
MVP, and like the timeline just didn't match up. And I think that's the most impressive thing to me is I've had students that leave my class with just a letter of intent and nothing more, and they don't intend on really moving forward. And I have some people that had upwards of 700 clients when they left my class. And
That's
it's just
amazing.
you really have that in between. And then you have some people that come with clientele and they just have an income goal and you work with them one-on-one. But really, that's the only difficulty with teaching those students because, and I think I have a very unique perspective. Yes, I'm teaching entrepreneurship. Yes, I'm in higher ed. Yes, I do the programming. But I also am what I call the successfully failed founder. And the
Mm-hmm.
respect that my company did not shoot off with all the success. Yes, we made money, we made revenue. That's great. We even made profit, but we weren't able to work on it full time. We
Mm-hmm.
weren't able to get to that milestone. So
Yep.
I'm coming at teaching as if it's saying,
That
do what
perspective.
I do or don't do what I do. And then I use my business as an example every step of the way. So
Love it.
instead of being like, instead of being a teacher that teaches entrepreneurship in the respect of just, here's what should happen based on based on books and stuff like that. Like my class does not have any books associated with my class. There are books that I
Mm-hmm.
recommend them to read. There are
Mm-hmm.
books that I think are good to read, and then I really want them to go and talk to people. I bring in people from all
Love
over the
it.
world, that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. So like it's not as easy
It's
uh,
not. Yep.
as easy for people to have that thing to have that way of teaching if they didn't have the experience that they did. So
Mm-hmm.
I actually praise Syracuse a lot for this because a lot of the teachers that I meet that teach entrepreneurship at Syracuse, they all have either similar experience to what I had or they're very, very successful and they went all the way through the next round. So you know who to pass them off to. It's like, I got you to here. I now got you revenue generating. This person has gotten to $1 million, $200 million business. You should go talk with them. And the best part is like they all want to talk to you. So like we're
Yeah.
all kind of teaching together in a way that is really unique. And we all teach differently. Some of us
Yeah.
teach from a book, some of us don't. But yeah, teaching to get them to the next level is just about them relating to yourself, being very open about the things that you think that you failed, which failure to me is not a curse word in the entrepreneurship field. It is a great thing because you got to learn and you know how to do it better next time.
Mm-hmm.
But it also, I am a success in the respect that we didn't really die. I just was like, I'm kind of tired. So
It's
like
choice. Choice, right?
it was a choice to get rid of it. So
But
yeah,
yes,
that's
you're absolutely right in that regard. That it's difficult to teach that particular this particular skill, I'd say, and that's the reason I asked a question. What I would like to say about the work you've done thus far is that it's very rare to see in the academic world that you see application of business principles, because it's not just about having an idea. It's about talking to customers. It's about getting in contact with customers. It's about potentially selling them as well. This is why I do see that you do accept LOIs for potential end of semester situations, because some deals take a lot longer. It can be done once a semester. But the idea is, I really love the fact that you are providing the opportunity to apply what you learn in school into actual practice. I think this is what we need to see more of in the academic world, to really see the full conceptualization of what these business principles are. So I want to now go ahead and talk more about Banter and more about how you came up with the opportunity and really what you do there.
Yeah, it's actually a really fun opportunity, and it was cool to get that offer. I went through when I was CEO and founder of Time Capsule. I went through a program called Founders Institute New York City,
Mm-hmm.
and there's tons of different Founders Institute. I went through the New York City one, and I had gone through, I was actually one of the further along businesses that were in it. There's a couple of us that were pretty far along, and one of the ones that was pretty far along with this company, Banter, and the founder,
Hmm.
Ken, and I kind of found each other as, really good friends. We were the people that were texting and connecting as often as we could. So it was one of those things that as people went on, now all of that cohort of friends, I miss them, and they have meetups that I don't get to go to because I don't live in New York City, and that's a whole thing with me too. But like he was still a part of all that. And when we finished the program, he had kiddingly, at first, at least I thought it was kiddingly, it was just like, like I needed a co-founder, like, this would be, and he was just like, I like could need a COO, like all this stuff. And he was like kidding with me for a while, and then time passed, and I said, no, like I have my business. And then I gave up my business, and I said, I really like the idea of not having to worry about all the stuff a founder has to worry about. I like the
Yeah.
internal stuff. I love HR and operations and marketing and that kind of stuff. I love how do you make the company work. I don't want to.
Hmm.
I'm not necessarily somebody that is in love with the process of like fundraising and partnerships and that kind of stuff. Even though I'm very good at it, not good with the fundraising, to be quite honest. That's something I'm still learning. But the
Hmm.
partnerships, the community building, all of that stuff, that's stuff that I'm good at. It's just not stuff that I love. So I
Sure.
end up going to him, my God, after like the fifth or sixth time that he had offered it to me as just like a joking thing. And then eventually it became very serious. And I said, yeah, I would consider it. And he's like, wow, that's not what I was expecting you to say. And I said, yeah, I would. And we went through a 3-month trial. And then we realized that we worked actually well together and
Hmm. Wow.
became COO. So that's kind of how that offer came. So I'm kind of living proof that one thing, even if it doesn't work out the way that you want, might lead you to something that it's a little bit more like you want.
Right. And what I was really interested in hearing more about actually is the founder's mental health situation.
Yeah.
So I think this is something that might not be talked about as much, but the life as an entrepreneur is very unpredictable. It
Yeah.
is something that can one day you could feel amazing, the next day you can feel terrible. So what is your thesis behind that?
Yeah. So I became very interested in founder mental health through this job specifically, but
Yeah.
even Time Capsule had a mission of helping curb founder mental health because we wanted founders to see their progress over time, in which to make sure that they know that they were progressing, that they didn't forget their lessons, that they're learning, that they could be better. And so already had kind of a background in it. I had already worked and started research into that. But really, when I came to this job, there was something. I was just at work, and this is like the most impactful story that really got me to
Hmm.
want to give talks on it and want to praise it. Is I was at work, sitting at my desk. I have a couple of students that I work with, and one of the students came in and said, I just said to them, "How was your weekend? What did you do this weekend?" And I was expecting, you know, nothing. It was good. I hung out with friends, something really basic. And he said, "I wrote my will," and I laughed, thinking because he had kind of dark humor, and I just assumed that was like
Okay.
that. And he wasn't laughing, and he was just like. And he looked very serious, so I stopped laughing. And one of my students at the other end of the table said, "Jay, do you not have a will?" And I said, "Well, yeah, but that's for a different reason." And someone else, another student of mine at the table went, "We all have wills because we're all struggling and we don't know when our family's going to need it." These are between the ages of 19 and 23 years old. And I went, that's a problem with me. On top of that, I've had a lot of struggle with mental health. I'm very open with the with the fact that I do have therapy. I do make
Hmm.
sure that I'm trying to be the best mentally that I
Sure.
can be. And I knew there was a problem because there was probably 6 of them at that table, and all of them said they had a will. So I
Wow.
said, there's got to be something bad about it. And the numbers that I found, which I wish I could recite them off the top of my head, I'm working on it. But if I believe correctly, um, 70% of all founders say that they struggle with mental health. in some way, shape, or form, or have been formally diagnosed with depression. And if I
I'm not
remember
surprised.
what? No, I'm
I'm
not
not
either.
surprised. Yeah.
And to be honest, if I remember the number correctly, I think they said 25% of that 70% had attempted um, to unalive themselves within the last year. And that's when I started to truly understand how critical it is to work with them. But on
Yeah.
top of that, I teach entrepreneurship very differently. Now, there's a thing that I know. My partner also works in the entrepreneurship field. They are also director, and the one thing that them and I actually disagree with a lot
Mhm.
is the fact that I believe you have to go further than just a basic mentor. There are places in which to seem more like a friend to them. And there
Mhm.
are lines, there are boundaries, there are making sure that you don't go too far past that line. But there are
Mhm.
moments where you need to sit and you need to hear your founders. There are
Mhm.
moments where you need to say, I am proud of you. How can I help? Where can I be? Not only am I proud of you, but know that you're not alone and that I hear you and that I see you. The amount of times that I've said, I'm proud of you, and I've had founders literally hug me crying, saying that's the first time that they've heard that from anyone is absolutely insane. Or one of the times that I was helping a founder and all I did was hug them. And they went to go pull away and I hugged them a little tighter and they got out of the hug and they went, thank you. That's exactly what I needed. I just needed someone to
Wow.
see me.
Wow.
And they became better because of it. They are now one of the lead people on campus with what they do. And I
Yeah.
think that is incredible. They went from being upset at the fact they're not getting far enough to now being the person people call for this one thing.
Yeah.
And I think that is truly fantastic. So I am
And by the way, I'll also say one thing. I apologize for interrupting you. I hate to
okay.
interrupt, but I'll also say there's something. I think there's some psychology behind that. If you enter into a loop of spiraling downward, I don't know what the term is called. My terms are not where it needs to be, but there's something in psychology where there's like a negative feedback loop in which if you go too far down, you can constantly think in a very particular manner, and that just reinforces potentially your life. But then
Yeah.
if you break that loop, it can change your thinking patterns, and then basically you can spiral upwards. So I think there's definitely actual science behind that. And in general, I'll also say that the fact that we're not talking about this enough is, I think, it's also a problem, because there's a large contingent of people, I'm sure, that will not get this extra help that they need if we don't talk about this particular situation. So I really appreciate you for having that perspective you provided there. And what I want to do is go ahead and shift this conversation to a little bit more about you, like on the personal side.
Mhm.
And the first question I have for you, Jonathan, is what is something about you or your life that you wish more people knew about?
Oh, that's a great question. Um, that's actually a really, really good question. I I
Most founders get stuck on this one question.
yeah,
You know what's interesting? It's very interesting.
to be honest, I think that there's a couple of different things going through my head. One of the fact that I'm a pretty big open book. Like my
Okay.
founders know about me. I tell them about my all of my troubles with mental health. They know my family history. I'm very open about that.
Mhm.
I'm very open about everything from my sexuality and my relationship to
Mhm.
what exactly where I am mentally in my journey as a founder. But I think the thing that I want people to know that don't necessarily know is that don't necessarily believe everything that you see, especially about my career, because as we found out before we started this podcast, like my LinkedIn looks very different than exactly what it is, and some of
Yeah.
it is a lot better than what it looks like, and some of it is not as impressive. Some of it is a lot different, and I think that I am a proponent, I should say, rather, of people knowing that like that's the reason I put it on there is because it was a title, it was a job that I had, or and
Oh,
that is what I did. But um, I have messed up. I have also been really successful. I have done things well. I have proven that I put founders first and that I am all about founder mental health. But then I also am the other side of it where I'm just a founder and I'm still trying because I'm a little over 10 years of experience. So I don't have 40 years like some of my mentors. So I think that would be what I want people to know, is the fact that I may have a very impressive career to some people, but I really am just trying, and so is every other person that you go to meet with.
Love it. And I really appreciate the perspective you provided today, especially on the pivoting side. You really fall into it by understanding new perspectives, doing the research, taking advantage of the opportunities that in relation to your business, and you can possibly pivot to something amazing. And the other aspect I was really interested in learning about today was really about your perspective on teaching entrepreneurship to people who are not accustomed to execution, right? It's about talking to customers, understanding their perspectives, adjusting it in that manner, and of course understanding that each business is case dependent, right? How does their business works, how long those deals takes, those are all different components. I really appreciate those perspectives you provided today, and of course we ended off with the founders mental health, which I think was absolutely amazing. What I'll do now is share just a quick perspective on fitness and health, and we'll go ahead and conclude the podcast with Jonathan's plans for this year. So the perspective I really want to share today, and to be as concise as possible, I'll just make a quick controversial statement, which I'll say is that I think the gym is not the best use of time if the goal is to pretty much lose weight or lose fat. The reason I say this is because I would like to provide the perspective that you don't need to be doing a location dependent approach where you're driving to a location to exercise and get in shape, because the mechanism behind weight loss, if you researchers with PubMed specifically, it's not you spending time inside of a gym, it's movement specifically. And of course, it's going to be your nutrition. So we can really figure out a way to make it as time efficient, then it's going to be a lot more doable for most people, especially if we're talking about entrepreneurs and executives specifically. As you know, that's the majority of my audience. So really, how can we restructure to be as time efficient as possible? You have to prioritize movement, but movement that is location independent as opposed to location dependent. And what I would specifically say with that is something like step count, because step count is something you can do literally while you're watching this podcast. It's something you can do while you're traveling. It's something you can do essentially as long as there's ground underneath you essentially. And that's what I really want to provide today, is a perspective that this is a lot more doable if you understand the requirements of the problem you're trying to solve. So that's a main perspective I really want to share today. And actually step counts, even what I use to lose over 70 pounds and actually keep it off. So hopefully that's a perspective that was valuable to the audience, and kind of giving a perspective that if we identify the requirements, we can come up with new pathways to meet those requirements and actually make the transformation possible. So that was the perspective I want to share today. What we'll do now is go ahead and go on to Jonathan's plans for this year or the coming year.
Yeah. Honestly, I think that it all wraps up in just this year is all about just becoming better than I was. And that's something that is new. Usually I have very set goals. For me, so my plans this year are really just to make sure that I am doing everything from investing correctly to working with more companies, like I joining the advisory board for Query out of LA. That was part of it as well. But I think my plans this year is also just to help Banter grow, to be the best teacher that I can be, and to make sure that I'm continuing to work with more and more different kinds of companies to not only help them with their mental health, but also to make myself better as a mentor, and hopefully to be a founder one day again someday.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining me, Jonathan. This was Aryan Mohindra, and